So if you struggle with drawing the head and the face when you're doing a figure drawing, the secret, the solution to that, which really accelerated my own drawings, is to not draw the face. So that's going to make sense as you go through this video, hopefully. But let's start with why the face and the head area is such a struggle. So let's say we are drawing a figure, a whole figure, not just the head, and it's not a portrait, it's the whole figure. This is the head on that figure. We're drawing the figure, we get up to the head and the face. What can often happen, at least what used to happen to me a lot, it probably happens to you too, is my brain would just start yelling at me, I'm taking over now. I know how to draw the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Don't use, use simplifying values or simplifying forms and all of that. We're not going to use those skills. We are going to draw the eyes, the nose, the mouth, because that way I can make sure that it's going to look like a person, because I know how to draw the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. So let me take over, and then my brain would start to kind of do the eyes, right, and start to draw out the nose, and then start to draw the mouth. Right? And you know what? In terms of like eyes or nose drawings or whatever, or mouth drawings, it's perfectly acceptable, right? So then it's like, okay, and then we'll add the eyebrows, and we're going to add some sort of beard, because, here's a beard. And then this is what's going to appear at the top of the figure drawing. Something like this, and then, we'll add some hair and all of that kind of stuff, right? Okay, and so this is what is going to appear on the figure drawings. This is the sort of thing that appeared on lots of my own figure drawings. I have some kind of beard. Anyway, the struggle here is that a number of things go wrong with this approach, with this method. So with this approach, you could try and get better and better at this approach, get more and more detailed and more sophisticated in how you draw the eye, start rendering eyes in huge amount of detail, or you could do the same with noses and the same with mouths and get better and better at each feature, and then hopefully your figure drawings will look better for that, right? At the end of all that practice. But unfortunately, this approach is fundamentally flawed. So I don't think it matters that much how good you are at it. You got to just flip a switch in your brain or in your eyes or whatever, see this whole thing completely differently, and actually it's going to be a lot less work. It's going to be much, much less to study and much, much less to draw. So just a couple of reasons that this approach is going to be fundamentally flawed. The first is that everything gets these strong, the eyes, nose, mouth get these strong outlines, these kind of clear-cut outlines, which they don't necessarily have in the actual reference, in the pose that we're drawing, right? I don't really see such a clear-cut outline around these features or around the nose. Like if we're going for the transition from nose to the cheek behind it, or even if we're going from sort of eyelid to the eye, or if we're going from the sort of moustache bit to the mouth, it's a pretty gentle and subtle transition. Whereas if I look at the transition from this plane being hit by light right here to this plane not being hit by light, we have this very clear and strong edge between the shapes, the planes being hit by light and the planes not being hit by light. And so what happens when you draw in this way is you give a lot of contrast and a lot of value to these outlines, to features, which actually, when you look at the reference, those are not very prominent. Those are very subtle transitions, very gentle transitions, right? We're going from kind of dark to dark to dark. It's very, very subtle. Whereas along, say, this line right here, we're going from this very light shape to this very dark shape here. And so that's a very strong transition. And so what we want to do is not outline the eyes, nose, mouth, even though the brain says, this is how we're going to make it look like a person. Trust me, you don't want your drawing to look stupid. Let me take over with these preconceived ideas about the face. A second problem with this, as well as this kind of weird sort of over-exaggeration of the outlines of the features, is it's so common and easy for the perspective of these features to get messed up, right? So in this reference, the face is turned away from us. You can see here the center line of the mouth, and then see how small the shapes are on the far side of the mouth versus the near side. What happens when you sort of just go, I'm going to draw a mouth now? Very, very often it's so tempting to have that far side just get stretched out, so that the shape of the mouth kind of becomes a bit symmetrical. Another thing that can happen is that this far side eye over here, it gets pushed outwards like this, because our brains just don't like to deal with the fact that that far side is a bit foreshortened, that there's an overlap and a lot of things are hidden behind the nose. And just generally speaking, anytime there's a center line and the form is turned away from us, we talked about this in the previous video, our brains love to stretch out the far side of that center line for some reason. It likes to stretch everything out that way. And you can see that that's what's happened here. So instead of drawing, you know, the far side as narrow as it really should be, it's all become stretched out like that. And then another thing is that all kinds of distortions can happen. So for the longest time, I drew the eyes too high up on the face. I just couldn't stop, even though I knew I was doing it. Because I was thinking about eyes, nose, mouth, and my brain just had this idea about where the eyes are, about here. It seemed to think that the eyes were up here. It would always draw the eyes up here. And I would say, I'm going to draw the eyes low. I'm going to draw the eyes low. And I would draw the face, and they would just get pushed up. Because somehow I just didn't believe that they were that low, even though they are. So what can we do instead? We can close one eye, squint at the reference, and draw the abstract 2D shapes that we see. So there's a big shape of dark, and then there's this shape of light, and we can draw that shape of dark and we can draw that shape of light, and it's nice because there's a little shape of light there too. So we close one eye, we squint, we draw the big abstract shape of dark and the big abstract shape of light. How detailed you want these shapes to be kind of depends on how prominent the face, how important the face is to the composition overall. If it's not the focal point, then you may want to really cut through a lot of the details and just kind of keep it very, very simple, like a very simple shape of light and a very, very simple shape of dark. Each of these marks used for these edges is a C, S, or I type of mark, right? C-shaped curve, an S-shaped curve, or a straight line. And especially straight lines are very, very good to use. And that's also the case if it's just a shorter drawing and you just don't have time, so you just keep it simple. If you have more time and if the face is going to be an important part of this, then you might like to kind of break up that edge and find more information within it, right? So it kind of depends on what you want to go for. Note that even then, I still was simplifying it quite a bit. I still wasn't using, one thing that I wasn't doing was kind of trying to sort of follow every single atom of this edge, you know, like really kind of follow it exactly like I'm seeing it, because it's just too convoluted. It's not appealing aesthetically. It's better to cut through the noise, even when you're trying to be a little bit more detailed about it, and find the big, simple shapes. And that's, you know, this is a very, I would say that that's quite a complex convoluted edge. And so ideally you'd go even simpler than this. Now, eventually you might want to bring out some information about the features of the face. So at some point, as you build up your simple 3D forms, like in the previous video, and you start to have an understanding of the overall form, and you cut that slice out for the eye sockets, and you do the corner of the face, and all of these kinds of things. And then you go for your big simple shadow shapes and you establish those. Eventually you may get to a point where you actually want to bring out a little bit, just a very subtle, like within the shadow, some bits get slightly darker for the eyelashes, or some bits get slightly darker, you know, in the sort of crease of the mouth or at the nostril, and you may actually want to draw a little bit of the features, but they come out very subtly. It's just a little bit of a slightly darker bit within an area that's already dark. You want to hold off on that as long as possible. So if you imagine in those movies like the Lord of the Rings and stuff, and the orcs are running, right? And then the goodies, the humans or whatever, they've drawn their bows and the orcs are coming, and they're all jittery and scared and they want to release the arrows, but the captain or whoever, I don't know, I should study this reference more. The leader says hold, right? Because the orcs are not yet in range. Hold, right? And they're jittery and they're scared, but you've got to hold until those orcs are within range. So hold off on drawing the eyes, the nose and the mouth until you've got your 3D forms, your planes, your simple 2D abstract shapes of value really strongly established. And then you can subtly indicate the features, and you'll realize that it doesn't take much, first of all, to give a hint about those features. And also you didn't probably need to study a ton about eyes, noses and mouths to be able to just put in those like little finishing touches to bring out those features. You don't have to draw the features, right? There are lots of great paintings and drawings, even where the face, you know, is you're looking at it from the front and they don't draw the face, right? It's lost in the shadow. So you don't have to draw it if it's not going to serve the drawing. Now, sometimes as you're doing your abstract shapes of light and dark, it's useful to toggle that switch back from abstract 2D shapes to 3D forms. So we had this understanding of the head as a 3D simple form before, and sometimes it's useful to kind of toggle your eyes back to that 3D mode, because it's going to help you make sure that your shadow shapes properly wrap over the 3D forms. And they may not wrap over the forms enough if you're just going 100% abstract 2D. So for a pose like this, which is obviously really foreshortened, it's quite a hard angle to draw a face from, sometimes it's useful to just kind of go, okay, wait, let me just switch back to 3D, and then I kind of remember that this is the form, right? The form is kind of running like this, and so if I want to draw, let's say, this abstract shape on the eye, for example, I'm going to want to make sure that that wraps over the 3D form this way. Or this shape here, the eyebrow, and then the little shadow here, it creates one shape. And I want to make sure that that is wrapping around the form of the head. And it's a similar thing like with this shadow shape, right? I want to make sure it wraps over the 3D form like this. Because if I just draw it like this, that doesn't really explain how I'm looking up at this rounded form. But if I draw it like this, I bring this out and I bring this out, then I'm really going to get that sense of how I'm looking up at these shadows. So sometimes you kind of do switch back to 3D and you kind of toggle between the abstract 2D shapes and the 3D shapes. So I drew this pose here over on the right. From the previous video, you'll remember, starting with a sort of ball shape, but then I'm trying to think about the abstract shapes. I'm trying to find this shape or this shape here or the shadow shape under the nose. These are the things that I'm looking for rather than thinking about, oh, I'm drawing a face. As soon as I try and draw this reference, which is really tricky, and I'm thinking about a face, I'm going to draw the eye like this. I'm going to accidentally draw the mouth. I'm just going to straighten the whole thing out. It's all going to get warped and it's going to get really crazy. I really, really have to commit to seeing it as an abstract 2D shape that I'm trying to capture rather than, you know, an actual face. So I'll just fast forward here and I stay on that, and maybe at the end I give a few little indications of some features. And this would be the face on a figure drawing. This would be like the start of that. This would be a lot more of the face than I would normally draw, but this is all about heads and faces, so I felt like I had to draw a bit more. You don't have to draw all of that. If you've got a whole figure to deal with, you don't need to treat the face any differently and draw it in a much more detailed way than any other part of the figure. So that's the secret, is don't draw the face. Switch to abstract 2D shapes of light and dark. I would really recommend practicing this with references lit from one side like this. So when you get, like professional photographer portrait photos, they're often lit from all angles and you don't get these clear-cut shadow shapes. So it's really useful to find references that are lit from one side, like the ones we have for free, link is below. We do photo shoots with special lighting to make sure that it's lit from one side and it really works for figures and for portraits. So that's going to make things a lot easier, I think, for this exercise. But yeah, that's why you don't draw the face when you're drawing faces on figures. You switch to abstract 2D mode and you toggle between those simple 3D forms. The link for the 3D form video should be up on the screen somewhere, and these abstract 2D shapes. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching.
If you like our tutorials and you're learning to draw figures, you're going to love this PDF guide. It gives you all the skills that you need to work on in order, and then asks you questions to figure out which skill you need to work on next, and then gives you links to the tutorials you need to learn those skills. We've also got a free mini course. It's a 10-day course. It is super powerful and effective. And for your regular figure drawing practice, we have tons of free references you can use in our free reference library. The link to all this stuff is below. The other skill you need for drawing heads is seeing the simple 3D form. That's covered in the first video on the screen. And if you want to get further into this skill about simplifying the light and dark into simple 2D shapes, check out the second video.